When my daughter-in-law told my husband to stand outside like a stranger, I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I just held my husband's hand a little tighter and smiled as if nothing had happened. That smile hurt more than tears ever could. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the house feels still and every sound feels louder than it should. The ceiling fan hummed softly. The clock on the wall ticked like it was counting. A single choice can change your life forever. Today, I'm sharing how betrayal forced me to choose myself when no one else would. Before the first chapter unfolds, please subscribe and hit like to help us reach others who might need to hear this. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Leave your city name in the comments so I can welcome you personally. And now, the story begins. Something important. My husband stood near the door, holding a small bag of medicines in his hand. He had just returned from the clinic. His shoulders were tired. His back was bent a little more than it used to be. My daughter-in-law looked at him, then at me. Her voice was calm, but her words were sharp. "Papa should wait outside. Guests are coming. This is not the right place for him." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I waited for my son to say something. He didn't. He kept looking at his phone, scrolling, avoiding my eyes. My husband nodded quietly, as if he understood, as if he deserved it. That was the moment something broke inside me. Not loudly, not all at once. It broke the way old glass cracks, slowly, silently, with no sound at all. I watched the man who had walked beside me for 40 years turn toward the door of his own son's house like he was a guest who had stayed too long. The door closed behind him, not hard, not angrily, just closed. And in that quiet moment, I realized something painful. Sometimes the deepest humiliation comes from the people we loved the most. I sat down on the edge of the sofa. My hands were shaking, but my face was calm. Because when you have lived a long life, you learn something important. Crying does not always change things, but remembering does. And I remembered everything. My name is Olivia. I am not a strong woman in the loud way. I do not argue. I do not fight with words. I am strong in the quiet way. The way women become strong after years of choosing peace over pride. My husband's name is Rashid. He has always been a gentleman, soft-spoken, hard-working, the kind who puts others first and himself last. We raised our son with love, discipline, and sacrifice. We gave him everything we could. When he married, I believed our family had grown. I did not know that sometimes families grow by pushing someone else aside. This is not a story of anger. It is a story of silence, of small moments that hurt deeply, of dignity tested, and of a truth that finally came to light when no one expected it. I have always believed that a home is built slowly, not with bricks, but with patience, not with money, but with understanding. That is how Rashid and I built our life together. We married young. We did not have much. Our first home had one small room, a narrow kitchen, and a window that looked out at nothing but a wall. But it was ours, and in that small space we learned how to listen to each other, how to forgive quickly, and how to stay quiet when words would only bring pain. Rashid worked long hours. Sometimes he left before sunrise and returned after dark. His hands were always rough. His clothes often smelled of dust and sweat, but his heart was clean. He never came home empty-handed. If not with money, then with a smile. If not with gifts, then with stories from his day. When our son was born, Rashid cried. I remember that clearly. He held the baby so carefully, like he was afraid the child might disappear if he breathed too hard. He promised that day to give him everything he never had, and he did. Our son grew up loved. We were not perfect parents, but we were present. We attended school meetings. We saved every coin we could for his education. When he fell, Rashid picked him up. When he failed, Rashid told him to try again. I stayed home most of the time. I cooked, I cleaned, I waited, I worried. Like most mothers, I measured time by my child's needs. Breakfast before school, lunch packed carefully, dinner late because Rashid came home tired. Years passed like this, quietly, steadily. When our son grew older, he became more distant, not unkind, just busy. That is normal, I told myself. Children grow, parents learn to step back. When he told us he wanted to marry, I felt happiness and fear at the same time. Happiness because he had found someone, fear because change always brings loss. I met my daughter-in-law for the first time at a small family gathering. She was well-dressed, confident. Her voice was clear and firm. She spoke directly, without hesitation. She was not rude, but she was not warm either. Still, I smiled. I asked her about her studies, her interests, her family. She answered politely, but briefly. Her eyes moved often to her phone. Rashid liked her. She is modern, he said later. Times are different now. I agreed. Times were different, so I adjusted my expectations. After the wedding, our son asked us to come live with them for some time. Just until things settle, he said. Then we'll see. I packed quietly. I folded my clothes neatly. I told myself this was temporary. At first, everything felt fine. The house was bigger than ours, bright, clean, new furniture, new routines. I woke early as always. I made tea. I kept the kitchen tidy. I did not interfere. I reminded myself again and again, this is her home now, not mine. My daughter-in-law ran the house her way. She had rules, schedules, preferences. I followed them carefully. If she liked breakfast late, I waited. If she preferred certain dishes, I cooked those. If she wanted silence in the evenings, I stayed in my room. Rashid noticed, but he said nothing. He has never liked conflict. He believed things would balance out on their own. But small things began to change. Conversations became shorter. Smiles became rare. Doors stayed closed more often. Sometimes I would enter the living room and the talking would stop, not suddenly, just gently, like a radio turned down slowly. I told myself not to imagine things. One afternoon, I heard my daughter-in-law talking on the phone. Her voice was sharp, annoyed. "They don't understand," she said. "I need space." I stood still in the hallway. I did not move. I did not listen further. That was the first time I felt like a guest. Rashid tried to help in small ways. He offered to run errands. He fixed small things around the house. He stayed out of the way. Still, tension grew, not openly, quietly. My son became different too, less patient, less present. When Rashid spoke, my son often answered without looking up. When I asked questions, he said he was busy. One evening, Rashid sat beside me on the bed. The light was low. The room smelled faintly of medicine. "Do you think we are a burden?" he asked softly. I wanted to say no. I wanted to laugh and tell him he was imagining things, but I could not. I took his hand instead. "We'll manage," I said. That was all. There were moments when I tried to connect with my daughter-in-law. I offered to help her with work. I asked her opinion on recipes. I complimented her clothes. She smiled politely, nothing more. Once, during dinner, she corrected Rashid in front of everyone, not cruelly, just firmly. "No, Papa, that's not how things work now." The word Papa sounded strange in her mouth, heavy, uncomfortable. Rashid nodded and fell silent. I watched his shoulders drop slightly. Another time, guests came over, family friends. My daughter-in-law asked me to stay in the kitchen, just in case something is needed, she said. I understood, or at least I pretended to. Rashid sat with the guests for a while. He spoke little, mostly listened. Later, he told me he felt invisible. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I began to feel smaller, not physically, but inside. I stopped sharing my thoughts. I stopped laughing loudly. I walked more softly. I told myself this was the price of peace. But peace built on silence is fragile. One night, I heard Rashid coughing in the bathroom, deep, painful coughs. I rushed to him. His face was pale. We decided to visit the clinic the next morning. My daughter-in-law sighed when we told her. "So early?" she asked. Rashid apologized. That word stayed with me, apologized, for being sick. At the clinic, the doctor spoke gently. Age, stress, weak immunity. Nothing serious yet, he said, but rest was important. Rashid nodded obediently. On the way back, he bought sweets for the house, even then. When we returned, the house was quiet. My daughter-in-law was on the phone again. My son was out. She looked at Rashid, then at the bag in his hand. "Why did you bring this?" she asked. "No one eats sweets anymore." Rashid smiled awkwardly. I thought, never mind. That afternoon, the humiliation happened, the one that opened my eyes completely, the one I described earlier. But before that moment, there were many small wounds, and small wounds, when ignored, become deep scars. I often think about that time now, about how gently everything fell apart. No shouting, no fights, just distance, just silence, just dignity being slowly peeled away layer by layer. And yet, even then, I did not hate anyone. I only felt tired. Tired of proving I belonged. Tired of staying quiet. Tired of watching the man I loved shrink inside himself. I did not know then that something was about to change, not because I planned it, not because I demanded it, but because truth has a way of standing up on its own when silence becomes too heavy to carry.
After that afternoon, nothing felt the same, even though everything looked the same. The walls did not move, the furniture stayed where it was, but the air inside the house felt heavier, like it was holding too many unspoken words. Rashid began spending more time in our room. He sat by the window in the evenings, watching the street below. Children played, people passed by. Life continued, as if nothing inside our house was slowly breaking. I tried to bring small comforts back into our days. I made his favorite tea. I reminded him to take his medicine. I told him stories from the past, hoping they would make him smile. Sometimes they did, but the smiles did not stay long. My daughter-in-law grew more distant. She spoke mostly to my son. Her voice softened for him and hardened for us. Not openly, just enough for us to notice. One morning, I entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast. She was already there, typing on her phone. "I already ordered food," she said, without looking up. "You don't need to cook today." I nodded and stepped back. The kitchen felt like it no longer belonged to me. Rashid tried to help in ways he always had. He swept the floor, he wiped the table, he fixed a loose switch. Each time, she reminded him gently but firmly. "We have someone for that," she said. "You don't need to do these things." Her words sounded kind, but they pushed him aside. My son noticed, but only briefly. When I tried to speak to him one evening, he sighed. "Ami, please don't make this complicated," he said. "Everyone is adjusting." I wanted to ask him who everyone was, but I stayed quiet. I started to feel like a visitor waiting for permission. Permission to speak, permission to move, permission to exist. Guests came often, friends of my daughter-in-law, people I did not know. On those days, Rashid and I stayed in our room. The laughter from the living room drifted down the hallway, bright, carefree. Once, Rashid stepped out to get water. A guest looked at him, confused. "Oh," she said softly, "I didn't know elders lived here." Rashid smiled politely. I saw his hands tremble as he returned to the room. That night, he did not eat much. Small arguments began to appear. Not loud, not dramatic, just sharp edges. Once, Rashid misplaced the television remote. My daughter-in-law's voice rose slightly. "It's always something," she said. "Things go missing when routines aren't followed." Rashid apologized again. I felt something tighten in my chest. Later, I told him, "You don't need to say sorry for everything." He looked at me gently. "It keeps peace," he said. "But peace that costs dignity is too expensive." One afternoon, my son came home irritated. "Work stress," he said. Rashid tried to speak to him, to offer advice. My son cut him off. "Papa, things are different now," he said. "You don't understand how this world works." The words were not cruel, but they were final. Rashid nodded. The conversation ended. I lay awake that night, listening to Rashid's breathing. Slow, uneven. I wondered when my son had stopped seeing his father as a guide and started seeing him as a burden. A few days later, something small happened that hurt deeply. I cooked lentils the way Rashid liked them, simple, comforting. My daughter-in-law tasted them and frowned. "There's too much salt," she said. "I'll make something else." She poured the pot into the sink. The sound of it hitting the drain felt louder than it was. Rashid watched quietly. Later, he told me he was not hungry. That night, I cried silently in the bathroom. I did not want anyone to hear. The distance between us and them grew wider, not in steps, in inches, but inches add up. My daughter-in-law began setting clear boundaries: meal times, living room use, television hours. Rules are not wrong, but rules without warmth feel cold. Once, she asked us to avoid using the main bathroom when guests were present. "It looks untidy," she said. I nodded again. Rashid started waking up earlier than everyone else. He took slow walks outside. He sat on a bench near the road. One morning, I followed him quietly. I sat beside him. "You don't have to stay out," I said. He looked ahead. "I feel lighter outside," he replied. That broke me. Another day, I overheard my daughter-in-law speaking to my son. "They interfere too much," she said. "We need our space." I wanted to ask her when we had interfered. I wanted to remind her of everything Rashid had done, but I stayed silent. Silence had become my habit. The tension reached its peak the day Rashid returned from the clinic, the day I spoke about before. He stood by the door with his medicine, tired, hopeful. My daughter-in-law looked at him, then at me. "Papa should wait outside," she said calmly. "Guests are coming." My son said nothing. Rashid nodded. That was when something inside me shifted. Not anger, clarity. I realized then that respect cannot survive where silence is mistaken for weakness. Rashid sat outside that day for almost an hour. The sun was strong, the bench was hard. When he returned, his face was calm, too calm. That night he had a fever. I sat by his side, holding his hand, listening to his breath. I made a decision quietly, not to fight, not to shout, but to stop pretending this was normal. Because love should never require someone to disappear, and the conflict that had been growing silently was about to reach a point where it could no longer be ignored. That night, while Rashid slept with a fever, I stayed awake beside him. The room was dark, except for the small light near the door. His breathing was shallow. Every breath felt like it carried weight. I pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. His skin felt warmer than it should have. I whispered his name softly, just to remind him I was there.
He opened his eyes for a moment. "Don't worry," he said weakly. "I'll be fine." Those words hurt more than the fever, because they were the same words he had spoken his whole life, when he was tired, when he was sick, when he was ignored. I realized then how often he had made himself small so others could feel comfortable. The next morning, my daughter-in-law knocked once before opening the door. She stood there, already dressed, her phone in her hand. "How is Papa?" she asked, not stepping inside. "He has a fever," I replied. "He needs rest." She nodded. "We have guests today," she said, "so please make sure he stays in the room." Her words were calm, practical, final. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight. She closed the door gently behind her. That was the moment I knew something had to change. Not loudly, not with drama, but with truth. Later that day, my son came into the room. He looked uncomfortable, like someone entering a space they no longer belonged in. "Ummy," he said quietly, "she didn't mean anything bad." I looked at him. "When did meaning matter more than impact?" I asked. He avoided my eyes. "She's under pressure," he said. "Work, home, everything." "So were we," I replied softly, "but we never made anyone feel unwanted." He sighed. "Please don't make this bigger than it is." I almost laughed. Almost. Because to him it was small. To us, it was everything. That afternoon, Rashid woke up feeling slightly better. He insisted on sitting up. "I don't want to lie down all day," he said. "I feel useless." "You are not useless," I replied, but the words felt thin in the air. In the evening, guests arrived again. Laughter filled the house. The smell of food drifted down the hallway. Rashid sat beside me, quiet. "I'll go outside for a while," he said. "I don't want to disturb anyone." That sentence broke something open inside me. "No," I said, not loudly, but firmly. He looked surprised. "We will sit here," I continued. "This is our son's house." He hesitated. "I don't want trouble," he whispered. "I don't want silence anymore." We sat in the living room that evening, not in the center, just on the side. The guests noticed us. They smiled politely. Some looked uncomfortable. My daughter-in-law froze for a moment when she saw us. Then she recovered. She served tea without speaking to us. My son avoided the room completely. After the guests left, the house felt tight, like a breath held too long. That night, my daughter-in-law finally spoke. "This is exactly what I was talking about. No boundaries." Rashid lowered his head. I stood up. "We did not interrupt," I said calmly. "We sat quietly." She crossed her arms. "This is my home," she replied. "I need comfort in my own space." I nodded slowly. "And what about ours?" I asked. There was silence. My son stepped in quickly. "Ummy, please," he said. "Let's not argue." I looked at him then, really looked. "When did asking for dignity become an argument?" I asked. No one answered. That night, Rashid had another fever, higher this time. I called the doctor. He advised rest and less stress. Less stress. I almost smiled at the irony. The next morning, something unexpected happened. My daughter-in-law's mother arrived unannounced. She was a strong woman, sharp-eyed, observant. She greeted everyone warmly. Then she noticed Rashid. "Is he well?" she asked. I explained quietly. She listened without interrupting. Later, that afternoon, while everyone sat together, Rashid tried to stand and nearly fell. I caught him just in time. Her mother saw everything. The room went silent. She helped him sit down. "Why is he so weak?" she asked. No one answered. She turned to my daughter-in-law. "Does he get rest?" she asked. My daughter-in-law hesitated. "We are busy," she said. Her mother looked around the house, then back at her. "Busy enough to forget kindness?" she asked gently. That question landed heavily. The truth had arrived without my help. That evening, her mother sat with Rashid. She spoke to him kindly. She listened. She saw what we have learned to hide. Later, she spoke privately to my daughter-in-law and my son. I did not hear the words, but I heard the tone. Firm, clear, unavoidable. That night, my daughter-in-law knocked again. This time, she came inside. "I didn't realize," she said quietly. "I thought I needed control." I listened. "I didn't see how it was affecting him," she continued. Rashid said nothing. I nodded. "Sometimes," I said, "we don't see what we're stepping on until it breaks." She sat down. "I never meant to humiliate him," she whispered. "But you did," I replied softly. The truth hung between us. The turning point did not come with shouting. It came with realization, and realization, once it arrives, cannot be undone.
The house felt different after that night. Not suddenly lighter, just more honest. No one rushed to fix anything. There were no big apologies, no dramatic promises. Only a quiet shift. The next morning, my daughter-in-law woke up earlier than usual. I noticed it because the kitchen light was already on when I stepped out of the room. She was standing by the stove, stirring tea. When she saw me, she paused. "Ami," she said softly, "I made tea for everyone." The words were simple, but they carried effort. I nodded. "Thank you," I replied. Rashid joined us a little later. He moved slowly, but he was smiling. Not the polite smile he used for strangers, a real one. She handed him the cup herself. "Papa, please sit," she said. "I'll bring it to you." Rashid looked surprised, almost unsure. He sat down. It was a small moment, but small moments are how healing begins. My daughter watched from the doorway. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. Later that day, he came to me. "Ami," he said, sitting beside me, "I didn't realize how far things had gone." I listened without interrupting. He continued, "I thought staying quiet would keep peace, but I see now that silence can hurt." I placed my hand over his. "We all learn late sometimes," I said. "What matters is what we do after." He nodded slowly. Over the next few days, changes continued, not forced, not perfect, but real. My daughter-in-law began including us in small decisions: what to cook, when to eat, where to sit. She asked Rashid for his opinion on repairs. She listened when he spoke. Rashid, in return, stopped apologizing for existing. He spoke more. He laughed occasionally. One evening, Rashid told a story from our early years. The room filled with soft laughter. I watched my daughter-in-law's face. She looked at him differently now, not as an inconvenience, but as a person. There were still awkward moments. Healing is not smooth. Sometimes she slipped back into old habits. Sometimes my son avoided difficult conversations. But now we spoke. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law sat with me in the bedroom. "I grew up in a house where control meant safety," she said. "I thought if everything stayed in order, nothing would fall apart." I understood then, not to excuse her actions, but to see her. "We all carry our fears into marriage," I said. "The problem comes when fear decides how we treat others." She nodded. "I'm trying," she said. And she was. Rashid's health improved slowly. Less fever, better appetite. The doctor said rest and peace were helping. Peace. That word finally made sense again. One evening, guests arrived unexpectedly. This time, my daughter-in-law did not ask Rashid to leave. She brought an extra chair. She introduced him proudly. "This is Papa. He raised my husband." Rashid straightened a little.
My heart felt full. After the guests left, Rashid sat quietly for a long time. "Do you know what surprised me most?" he asked. "What?" I replied. "That respect feels heavier than humiliation," he said. I had forgotten how to carry it. I smiled. We stayed longer in the house after that, not because we had nowhere else to go, but because we were no longer invisible. Still, I knew something important. Healing does not erase memory. I did not forget the bench outside, the closed doors, the silence, but I did not hold them like weapons. I held them like lessons. One evening, I told my daughter-in-law something I had never said aloud. We stayed quiet because we did not want to lose our son, but silence almost made us lose ourselves. She listened, really listened. "I'm sorry," she said, not quickly, not defensively, just honestly. My son heard it too. That apology did not erase the past, but it softened it. We began planning for the future, not as strangers sharing space, but as family learning boundaries with respect. We talked about moving to a smaller place nearby, close but independent. My daughter-in-law supported the idea. "You deserve your own space, where you don't have to ask permission." Rashid agreed. That night, as we packed slowly, I felt no bitterness, only relief. Leaving with dignity feels different from being pushed out. On our last evening there, we sat together at the dining table, all of us. No tension, no silence, just food and quiet understanding. I realized then that resolution does not mean everything becomes perfect. It means truth is finally allowed to stay in the room. When we finally moved into our own small place, the silence felt different. It was not the heavy silence of being ignored, nor the sharp silence that comes after hurtful words. It was a gentle silence, the kind that allows you to hear your own breath again. The rooms were simple, the walls were plain, there was no new furniture, no decorations meant to impress anyone. But for the first time in a long while, Rashid stood in the middle of the room and smiled without hesitation. He placed his bag down slowly, as if testing whether the ground beneath him would stay steady. I watched him sit on the edge of the bed, rest his hands on his knees, and close his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they looked lighter. That was when I understood something very clearly. A home is not where people tolerate you. A home is where you are allowed to breathe. In the days that followed, our routine returned in a quiet, familiar way. I woke early again, not because I had to, but because my body remembered how. I made tea and stood by the window, watching the street come alive. Rashid took his morning walks, slower than before, but steadier. Sometimes he came back with bread. Sometimes he came back with stories about people he met along the way. No one rushed us. No one asked us to stay out of sight. If Rashid wanted to sit in the living room all afternoon, he did. If I wanted to hum while cooking, I hummed. These small freedoms felt like gifts we had forgotten how to accept. Our son visited often. At first, he came quietly, unsure of his place. He would sit carefully, choosing his words, watching our faces. I did not punish him with coldness. I did not remind him of the past. I simply treated him as my son. Over time, his shoulders relaxed. He spoke more openly. He listened more carefully. I saw guilt in his eyes sometimes, but I did not push it away or pull it closer. Guilt has its own work to do. My daughter-in-law came too, not as often at first, but when she did, she stayed longer each time. She helped in the kitchen, she asked Rashid about his health, she did not rush her kindness, and that made it real. One afternoon, as we sat together drinking tea, she said something that stayed with me. She said, "I thought strength meant control. I see now that it means care." Her voice was quiet. There was no need to answer her. some realizations do not need a reply, they only need space to settle. Rashid looked at her and nodded, not as someone forgiving from above, but as someone meeting her where she was. That moment felt like closure, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer ruled the present. As time passed, Rashid's health continued to improve. The doctor noticed it too. "Less stress," he said again, smiling this time. I wanted to tell him how true those words were, how stress is not always loud, how it can sit silently in a room and slowly drain a person without anyone noticing. But I only nodded. Rashid began tending to small plants on our balcony. He talked to them sometimes, encouraging them to grow. I watched him carefully, noticing how his hands moved with purpose again. When a man feels respected, even his silence becomes peaceful. There were evenings when I thought about everything that had happened: the bench outside, the closed door, the way Rashid had lowered his head so many times to avoid conflict. These memories did not come back to hurt me anymore. They came back to remind me. They reminded me of how easy it is to confuse patience with weakness, and how dangerous that confusion can be. They reminded me that love does not mean enduring everything quietly. Sometimes love means standing still and refusing to disappear. I also learned something about myself. I had believed that keeping peace meant staying silent. I believed that a good mother absorbs pain so her child does not have to face it. But I learned that silence, when it hides truth, does not protect anyone. It only teaches others that respect is optional. I did not shout, I did not fight. I simply stopped pretending that humiliation was normal. That quiet choice changed everything. Our family did not become perfect. We still misunderstand each other sometimes. We still carry habits from the past. But now there is awareness, there is conversation, there is space for everyone to exist without shrinking. When we sit together now, no one is sent away, no one is hidden. Rashid speaks when he wants to speak. My daughter-in-law listens. My son looks at his father with respect that feels earned again, not automatic, but chosen. If there is one thing this life has taught me, it is this: dignity is not loud, it does not announce itself, it waits patiently, and when it is ignored too long, it leaves quietly. But when it is honored, even softly, it transforms everything. You do not need anger to demand respect. Sometimes all you need is the courage to stop accepting disrespect. I share this story not to blame and not to shame. I share it because many people live inside quiet pain. They sit on benches outside their own lives, telling themselves it's temporary, telling themselves it keeps peace. But peace that costs your self-worth is not peace. It is a slow kind of loss, and no one deserves that. Today, when I look at Rashid sitting by the window, sunlight falling gently on his face, I feel grateful, not because we were hurt, but because we learned, not because things broke, but because something stronger was built in their place. Life does not always reward silence. Sometimes it rewards truth spoken softly and held firmly. And if you are listening to this, feeling unseen, feeling like you have to shrink to belong, remember this: you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be treated with care. You are allowed to stay in the room.